For each and every one of us, our day is filled with so much activity. So many tasks. And what's motivating it all? Why are we so driven to race around during the day? And when I become quiet, withdraw into a quiet place inside where I can ask these questions of myself and allow the answers to emerge from the silence. And there is clarity. I begin to see what's driving it all. At the root, at the seed, each and every one of us seeks to feel valuable. And we try to attain that value in so many different places in the day. A lot from the actions, a lot from other people, and even from things, possessions. But those sources of value are external to me and they all come and go. They're temporary. Seeking a deeper source of self-worth is the essence of spirituality. Rather than waiting for the answers to emerge from that silence, I pour myself into that silence. I dive into that silence. Let it wash away the layers until the essence of the self is revealed. I remember I'm a spiritual being, and my value is of a spiritual nature. It can never be found in the physical. I am eternal. Timeless. I am not physical. I am incorporeal. And what is the value of an incorporeal being? It is values itself. All the values are contained within me, and that makes me valuable. Within me, there is peace, there is love, there is wisdom. In the silence, I can feel these values within the cell. The truest, most timeless sense of self-worth as an incorporeal being, a soul. Om Shanti.
Shanti, good evening. Welcome to Interview with the Raj Yogi. Our series for January are actually going to sorry, interview with a Raja Yogi. If I said it wrong, I don't even remember what I said.
An interview too sick, Raj.
Oh, Pat. Yes, I apologize if I have a coughing fit. We didn't even know if we were going to have a session tonight. But the sessions for January are inspired by a very special month. For the students of Raja Yoga all over the globe, we are experimenting with silence, actually, but it's not physical silence, but just different practices of soul consciousness, awareness, remembering who I am, to really integrate that through the day, like real, going into reality. So tonight's topic is actually, the title of it is I am an incorporeal being. I am an incorporeal soul. But that title may not be meaningful for those who are watching if you don't, you haven't taken the course. But ultimately, it is really, what is the experience of value as a spiritual being? And so, in terms of for yourself, I found it was quite interesting hearing about your journey when you stumbled upon Viktor Frankl's his writings, that this is a soul who was in a concentration camp, and that he already identified, even though this is such a extreme situation he is in, to identify that there's much more value within himself, and he is really in control of a sense of self. When you had shared, when you first took the course, you had recognized immediately that there was a connection between soul consciousness and self-respect. Do you remember much about that connection, or was it just something that just spoke to your heart and you didn't notice if there was much more to that in terms of what you discover in the beginning? Because for some, they hear the word soul and it may not necessarily be meaningful to them, which is very relevant to this topic.
So within each of us as a soul, we have certain what we call subtle capacities, and two of them are called the mind and the intellect. And the mind thinks, whereas the intellect can feel or recognize. So I guess what must have happened in the course was the lesson on soul. I am an incorporeal, which means non-physical being. I am a soul, was given. And then I think it must have been the intellect, because there weren't any thoughts. It was only after the fact, as we so-called churn on it. But I think the intellect just said that self-respect. It just recognized or felt it. And it's only after the fact that it became clear why it's self-respect. Because what we're saying in the idea that I am an incorporeal or non-physical soul is that my identity, my real identity, which means also my real value, is not connected to anything corporeal. Everything corporeal is temporary. That would suggest that my identity and therefore my value would also be temporal, would be going up and down and changing and coming and going. And that really didn't ever make much sense to me, that, that if I happen to, have something for a while or be something for a while, then I'm valuable, but it would disappear. It just made no sense to me that the value of the self was not actually within the self rather than external to the self. So just after thinking about it, it was clear how soul consciousness would be self-respect. But initially it was just this feeling, this recognition, that self-respect.
It's a question there for you, I think. Yeah. It's a yes, Judy said. Excuse me. It's interesting because it feels like it's actually within each being, whether or not they're aware of their soul or not, a thirst for a value that's not physical. It's as if it's really programmed within us, but it doesn't seem like it becomes apparent at all until, I love you use that famous phrase, until the timing is right. But it's, it's a beautiful experience sometimes, and I find you can even put into words that value is really sometimes beyond words, that experience. But when you tell souls to begin with, value that's not physical, perhaps there's a deep part of them that recognizes that, but then there's all the ego and perhaps maybe just a lot of other stuff that gets in the way. Sounds like from your experience, it was like this disinterest and this longing that just woke up inside.
Yeah, I guess for every soul, um, you know, so motivated through the day to actually feel valuable. We all have different ways of trying to get it, so it looks like we're at odds. But that, I think, is a very basic drive or hunger inside every soul. And so when we talk about timing, and using the term of hunger, I can fulfill that hunger for a while in various temporary, we might even say artificial ways, just as someone might use artificial sweetener. But at different times, there comes a point when it's not working anymore, or the price of it is too great. It's actually causing pain or damage, just as certain things we put in the body might eventually cause damage. So I think that's perhaps comes at different points for different souls when they start to have that, yes, distaste, or it's just not working, or it's just too painful to continue that way, and looking for a different means of feeling valuable.
Just when you were sharing, I was thinking about a practice that students have been invited to have is that we usually use the word I so many times in a day, but whether we're aware of it or not, a certain kind of understanding of ourselves comes in front of us, whether it's the roles, whether it's, what someone's opinion is of me, how someone treats me, quote unquote. But in this little practice is that every time you notice I comes up, whether it's overtly or just subtly, to practice experiencing myself to be a spiritual being, an incorporeal being, and ultimately at that level of value. I found this just been so powerful because it made me realize how much we're actually not aware of how much such a small word actually has become our entire world. And what has that practice been like for you through the years? And what has that been like for you just even this last week or so? Because I know at one point in time you've shared that it's just progression in terms of that journey of soul consciousness. And have you felt, this meaningful sense of it getting deeper and deeper and having to let go of what your experience was like, maybe even last week?
Two things were coming to mind as you were sharing, and one is the image of a lake, or maybe even an ocean. I think an ocean is quite a vast example. So dealing with maybe a lake that, you're on one shore and you want to get across to the other shore. And so you start to, it might be quite attached actually to one shore, but the other shore looks very attractive. So the first thing that happens is I'm attracted to that other shore. I recognize. And the attraction actually is freedom. This word I has created quite a bondage, actually. So there's freedom, the possibility of a very free way of moving through the world. And what that means is, of course, the integrity of the self is intact, but I'm not affected by everything. So this very free way. Some people say, oh no, I'm not affected by anything, but there's a pushing away or a violence or a judgment in that, and that's not free. So there's this allure of freedom on the other shore. So I recognize that doesn't mean I'm over there, but in a second, I recognize that's where I'd like to go. So then eventually there's enough strength, if you will, or pull to start to let go of attachment to the shore that's so familiar but has become a bondage. And I start to move out into the lake, and it's okay for a while, but the bottom of the lake keeps dropping lower and lower. I'm on my tippy toes and it's getting quite awkward and uncomfortable. But I keep going, and yes, I might actually become completely immersed at some point, but I keep going, discovering I can, yes, function underwater. I keep going, and eventually you start to get closer to the other side and you start to re-emerge out of the depths. But now you're on this other shore. It's still a shore, but now you're on the other shore. And it's the part in the middle that gets most interesting. As I say, it can be very uncomfortable. It's as if you're entering in a different world because you're functioning underwater. Sometimes it's like, where are the reference points? So it's really important to have good anchors as you move through the deepest part of the journey. But eventually you start to feel closer and closer to the other shore. So, but step one is just recognizing I am interested in that other shore.
Excuse me, you're right. Two sick yogis here in this interview. But we're learning to practice to be beyond it. So, so Harsha has just mentioned here, can we see the freedom also as a sense of purity and peace, fresh and blissful?
Of course, yeah, that is the freedom, definitely. Free to be the self, but again, this very pure form of self or I, which is pure and peaceful. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because this word purity has such a history around it. And you had shared the other day in some middle class. Purity is really when there is only truth, when there's only the experience of truth. And what has happened to this history of this word, it's not even just about the word, it's the experience that souls have. But when it comes to little children, you use the word purity and there's no problem. You think of like this glass of water right here, and you think pure, water, and that's not an issue. When you think about adults and the word purity, and it's something kind of goes on inside, we can't even describe. But it really made sense when you're sharing about that which is just the truth. And yet at the same time, then you really don't even know what the experience of purity is, even though we have it in us. Yet we want it so much unless there is an understanding of who we really are.
I always find, particularly the teachings of Raj Yoga, not just very merciful, they really are intended to liberate each and every one of us, but also very hopeful in the sense that they really teach that our intrinsic state is pure and we are destined to return to that pure state. And so I think if our innate state is pure and we're destined to return, I think within each and every one of us, there's this very interesting relationship with purity that will eventually be resolved, where in essence, we're both attracted to it very deeply, but also, I don't know if repelled is the word, but wary because we've lost it and we're not quite sure what storyline or understanding will help us to reconcile that. So rather than face or having to resolve that relationship with purity, we can sort of just turn away from it. But it's what we all really want, is that authentic self back, that memory is inside.
Now, I know we're using a term that's very specific in Raja Yoga, incorporeal soul. And we often say it's, it's just the highest level of vibration. But what comes from that, a certain quality level of thoughts and feelings. Can you share more about that, just for to try to grasp how that even works?
I actually really enjoy reflecting on this particular idea. And one of the images that's always come to me, it's going to be a little odd, so hopefully it makes sense. But if you can imagine a bird flying in the sky, it's a very unique bird in the sense that the moment the bird hits the water, they change into a fish. So, this idea that we are incorporeal beings, and the moment we come into in that pure way, we haven't lost ourselves yet in the corporeal, we haven't forgotten ourselves. But as incorporeal beings, the moment an incorporeal being hits the corporeal, they are benevolent. That's how the incorporeal shows up in in the corporeal realm, is as benevolent. The moment we start to think, lose that incorporealness, we're always an incorporeal soul, but in the sense of awareness that we're conscious of that, we start to lose our benevolent nature. So we start to be comparing, competing, conflicting, criticizing, judging, insecure, doubting, etc. It goes on and on. But actually, this beautiful idea that the kind world that we seek, the graciousness, the thoughtfulness, the love, all of these benevolent qualities that we would like in the world depend on us reconnecting with our incorporealness. We need that level of detachment to actually be that loving.
Sharing was reminding me of some realizations I was making lately of just how subtle value can be in terms of what our dependence is. And I guess I was thinking about when I first learned to drive the car, and or even when you just get a new car, you don't even know the dimensions of the car. But after a while, it's kind of weird that can know how close you can actually do a parallel park, or you're backing up. It's kind of weird in a way because it's not you, right? But you can become so familiar with it. And that's just the dimensions of a physical car. But I was thinking about even subtly the dimensions of this body with respect to value, that we have these subtle things like, am I sitting at the front of the room? Is someone actually looking at me when I'm talking to them? Am I actually being heard? It's just so subtle. I was just realizing what value is like. And when you're in the study, it's as if you become quite hypersensitive. And I don't mean that like everyone should be afraid, but you actually become more sensitive to perhaps maybe real value, or when value is false. So why I was sharing with this was, when you're talking about vibration, just being incorporeal, there's like a quote unquote form to my sense of self that's not physical. And to be able to experience that and let go to that, it's like we don't even realize how scared ego is. At the same time, it seems like it's a quite of an abstract thing that I could be sharing. Some might say, I don't know what, no one was talking about. But I was thinking about this so much because one of the classes of the weekend was that you need to practice what your real sense of self is, so that the awareness of your form, it's not like, just on a point of light, but the dimensions of who you are, that it isn't dependent on anything physical. The dimensions of who you are completely free of that, because the dimensions of who you are completely intact in that which is eternal, which isn't physical, and yet is so real. And just what has your experience been like of these subtle things of false value, letting go of them? Because one of the conversations we were with earlier today was there is what I'm not, but there's what I am. And it feels like more and more both of them have to be simultaneously very clear to myself, to fill in something and to let go of something.
What incorporeal is saying is, can I let go of everything and still exist? That's incorporeal. And yes, I can see that being frightening to many, but what we actually have landed up living in is I am hanging on to so much, and within it all, I do not exist. So I'm really not here in the sense that my true self is gone. So it's like a shell. So it's really moving from one to the other. And even the word egoless is something we'll look at tomorrow. And, you know, this idea of, okay, is there life after ego? How do you exist without ego? But this idea of, again, it's a liberation, this state of being that is so free. And as we move through the corporeal realm, and yes, it can get more and more subtle, the ways that we seek value, really subtle. And we even use the word royal. They look really good. But they, if I'm honest, I can see that it's still creating instability inside, or sort of anchoring myself in something that is temporary, to become completely free. So I am valuable no matter what is going on, whether I have this or I don't have this, whether I'm liked or I'm not liked, whether I made a mistake or didn't, I am still of value. So it's called unconditional or unlimited. And it's so free and so beautiful. And because one is filled with pure value, probably the most beautiful thing about that state, you're not taking from others, which means you're free to give. And this only increases our sense of value. I'm giving without any need to take recognition. And I remember meeting the senior students, and they're so surrendered to God. That's really, where they're getting that sense of their true value being nourished, is their relationship with God, that God can use them and give through them, and they're completely unaware, that they're being used in such powerful ways, completely unaware of what any of us are receiving through them as an instrument for God. They're so free. Whereas we like to talk about what we've done, I don't think you can see the picture behind me, but Mama, I find interesting because this was the second student after Brahma Baba, and she did not like to talk about. So I don't think any of us really will ever know how much was done through that soul, how much service. She did not like to talk about it, was very incognito. And it's just, I just feel that soul is so free, so free. It's so attractive for the ego to not be there, because it snags on everything and really affects the quality of our life and those around us.
Thank you. It's such a deep topic. We have only an essenceful amount of time. So perhaps we'll have a little reflection.
Spirituality is not complicated. It's very simple. But we have become complicated. And so we find the simple very challenging. What spirituality says is, you are a spiritual being, and this is your source of value. It's very simple. Of course, to experience myself as a spiritual being requires tremendous letting go. So many layers of attachment. And each layer, each attachment is motivated, designed to increase my perceived value. And so other elements become involved: desire, greed, fear, anger. Becomes complicated. But if that hunger for that very free state of pure self-worth is there, I will move through those layers, even be open to taking support from God. So I can move through those layers that are all illusions and arrive at that very pure, simple point. I am an incorporeal soul, precious, absolutely no reason, unconditional. My very state of being is valuable. Returning to that pure state of being, making that my number one priority. That alone is an expression of self-respect. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Thank you for joining with us this evening and your patience with us as we grapple through. I just wanted to let you know, as a reminder, we have a workshop in English at the Inner Peace Center this Saturday. I believe the timing is 1 o'clock to 4:30, but the details are on the website. It is only on site, not online. Registration is required, and you can find that on the Calgary Brahma Kumari's website. You can also find that on Eventbrite as well. If you just enter Calgary Brahma Kumari's, you'll find a list of all those sessions. We also want to let you know that the practical meditation sessions are happening on the Mondays at the Inner Peace Center just for the month of January, just as we encourage a bit more introversion, more introspection and reflection. They will become just pure meditation sessions for those Monday evenings. Again, everything that is on site at Inner Peace Center does require registration. So we will be sending that note out to souls so that they're aware of that. But sessions that are still happening in Hindi on Wednesdays and Thursdays and Fridays will still remain. We have a very special session. We're just getting the details ready on World Meditation Hour. That's the third Sunday of the month. So please save that date. I believe that's January 15th. We will be at Scarborough. So we'll have World Meditation Hour there at Scarborough, but it will be a special program that's dedicated to the first student in the study, Brahma Baba. And so the World Meditation Hour will be created as a program, and details will come up for that. So please save the date for that as well. Lots of other online and on-site sessions, so please visit the website. Thank you so much for joining. Om Shanti.